Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. So today's sermon is going to focus on the topic of the goal. It's something that focus on the theory of constraints. So in business analytics, it's actually applied everywhere. The theory is very simple. It's called a bottleneck for a reason. For example, when you pour water from a bottle, the bottleneck is the single most restrictive element of that bottle. If the bottle was a complete cylinder, by and large, it would just pour out. Now, the theory of constraint is this. So it follows a story. The person who kind of came up with this idea or put this forward is a guy called Eliyahu M. Goldratt. And he came up with the understanding. He used basically like a novel to tell the story of how this applies in your life. So there's this production manager, might be operations manager, who was asked to take his kids' scout team on a hike. And so they did that. He volunteered, he helped. They went on this hike, and as they went along, they needed to get to the campsite before dark. But the problem was there was a kid called Herbie way, way, way back at the end. Herbie was lagging. Herbie was a bit chunky. He was slow, and he dragged the team. And so between each pit stop, they would have to stop, and he would ask, "Where's Herbie?" And Herbie's right there at the back. And the team naturally organized themselves to the best hiker at the front, Herbie sitting way back at the back. And so what happened was just almost like a snake. You're stretching the people in front, getting further and further, and the person behind getting further and further behind. So you're having to double back just to find Herbie. And then so the people at the front would do a start and stop, start, stop, start, stop. Because if they kept going, he wouldn't have control of vision over these guys. So he thought about it for a second, and he realized actually what I need to do is put Herbie at the front. Because if I leave him at the back, we're always going to have to catch back. Obviously, there's the social amount of pressure that he was experiencing as well, but he was struggling. He was doing his best. And so he decided to put him at the front. And lo and behold, they moved at his pace, right? Which is already pretty an improvement from the past because you're not losing Herbie and no one behind is lagging. But at the same time, you're still at the same pace. You haven't elevated that pace. So then it goes through this step. This whole book, the book is called The Goal, talks about this journey that this production manager goes through. He's having like a fallout in his life. Everything's breaking apart. His production is failing. And this was his epiphany to realize, actually, this is what I need to do in my life. And what he did was he came up with 5 principles that effectively changes the way you address the constraint, the thing that is the bottleneck. And the first is identify the constraint. Now, what is the thing that is slowing the system down? Obviously, it's Herbie. The second thing is to elevate the constraint. What can we do to help Herbie now, immediately? It's actually, not elevate, it's exploit. So they found out actually this guy was carrying a mega bag as well because he's big, but he's also carrying one of the biggest load for the team, the camping gear and everything else. So they offloaded that bag, distributed it across the team. And that's the third element, which is subordinate. You subordinate the problem to other elements in the system, other people that can help you. So if I'm carrying a heavy bag, I'm the slowest, I'm climbing up this hill, and you're all behind me and you're all whippersnappers trying to get past, then the logical conclusion is for you to help me, right? Even if some person at the back could take more. And this term is called haijunka in Japanese. It means to load level. So a system that is efficient is evenly distributed in load. You're not putting the most stress or work in one particular machine and then nothing afterwards, right? Ideally, between each stage is an equal distribution of load. Now, this story, how does this relate to submission? Well, the identification of what the issue is clear. For us, every single one of us, is the ego. You can just skip the queue. If you haven't figured out what your Herbie is, it's your ego. Your ego is the sole restrictor, the bottleneck to you and God. Your journey towards submission, your journey towards hiking and elevating your understanding, your ability to submit to God is pretty much only withheld by your ego. by and large. And this is also the concept where there's a thing called the Pareto analysis. So the Pareto analysis is very simply 80% of your problems are caused by 20% of the causes. It's very simple. And in any given space, if you're experiencing a huge chunk of problems, let's say you're having a lot of strife, you're unable to manage your time, you're unable to make your business succeed, you're unable to find a job, whatever it is that is restricting you, 80% of what's happening in your life is because of 20% of all the possible reasons, right? One, it could be you didn't prepare enough. Let's say it's an interview for a job, you didn't prepare enough. Let's say it's for your business, maybe you didn't collaborate enough, you didn't prepare enough, you don't have enough capital, whatever the case is. And so if you list all the reasons as to why you would fail or unable to see God or reach a perfect, happy life, you will find that one of those 5 reasons, one of the top 2, top 1, ego sits supreme, right? And this goes in Surah 45:23. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أفرأيت من اتخذ إله هوى. Have you seen those who have taken their ego as their God? Right? The word hawa there is used as desire. So if you have desire that's driving you, if you have some blindsidedness towards a specific direction, it's your ego. If you need to overtake a conversation, if you need to have the last word, if you need to interject and just splurge yourself into the scene, that's a sign that your ego is present and is overtaking you. And the problem is always the ego. Whatever it is, you stub your toe, you fell down, someone was injured, you got a cut. Think back to your ego. First and foremost, something there was wrong. That was the point of this theory of constraint, is that the problem is singular. There's only one constraint at any one time in the system, only one. You address that constraint, and then another one will appear, right? It's a possibility that you have humbled yourself enough by addressing your ego to the point that eventually another problem might come up. Let's say you're too humble, you're too soft-spoken that you're not even being forthcoming. That might be a problem in the future. But before that point, you have to address the ego. I'll read this full verse. This is the title, Common Form of Idolatry, the Ego as a God. Have you noted the one whose God is his ego? Consequently, God sends him astray, despite his knowledge, seals his hearing and his mind, and places a veil on his eyes. Who then can guide him after such a decision by God? Would you not take heed? So here it's saying the Arabic there is qalb, or the heart, but it's more logical to say that this is the mind. And also when God is saying that God is sending him astray despite his knowledge. So that's a sign of ego. Someone who glorifies their ego is founded in knowledge. You could be completely inundated with information, able to recite chapter and verse of the Quran or this hadith or this position, whatever, right? But it's not what you know. Because God is saying here, despite his knowledge, God is choosing to send him astray because of what he first glorified, which is himself, his ego, his understanding, his ability. And so that's a sign of someone with a high ego, or more likely someone who can falter into their ego, is that you have all this knowledge given by God, but what God does is it seals your mind. What you see is not what the truth is, right? You're blinded by what it seems to be. What you hear is a deafness. You don't hear the truth. And your mind is completely sealed. Your heart is closed to submission. Like the verse says, I was just reading it just now, 6:125. Whomever God wills to guide, he renders his chest wide open to submission. And whomever he wills to send astray, the same word, dalal, he renders his chest intolerant and straitened, like one who climbs towards the sky. God does place a curse upon those who refuse to believe. And Rashad places the footnote here saying, centuries after the revelation of the Quran, we learn that the proportion of oxygen diminishes as we climb towards the sky and we gasp for air. And so God is the one removing the restriction from you, that bottleneck, your ego. But you have to make that choice. You have to first understand this is the problem. And part of that is after the identification, after the exploitation of what things you can do to help yourself, comes the elevation. Elevation is where you go big, when you actually spend time meditating, when you try to improve, let's say, your humility or your tone. Right? The verse goes, "Do not roam the earth arrogantly." Right? Tread lightly. And that's again a reminder that this is how you should be behaving as a submitter. And so, going back to this story, oftentimes when I enter a business and I'm told there's a problem, the first thing I do, I do something called a value stream mapping. Is I follow the trail of the problems, and there's other tools you can use, like trying to find out the root causes and all that. But basically, I'm following the money. I follow the where the value is placed and how it's handled in the business. And oftentimes, it'll hit one spot, it will die there for a long time, and then eventually it moves. And so people are complaining about, oh, they haven't processed the order early enough, or we haven't got the equipment to do this and that and the other. And it's the same. A lot of the people that don't have the confidence and the ability to reach God, they'll say, oh, I don't have sufficient knowledge to strive, for example. I don't have sufficient ability to deliver the message, or I'm afraid of the consequences. The problem is not any of those things. The problem is back to the self. The problem is inside you, your ability, your striving, your mechanics in ways that you try to reach God. So God willing, we'll continue in that vein. So some of the things you can do to exploit the constraint is by purifying your soul. In 91:9-10, God says, "Successful indeed is the one who redeems his soul, and doomed is the one who corrupts it." So part of redemption are us committing to our rights, praying 5 times a day, doing your Sayyam. All of us are doing that now, God willing. You're paying for your zakat. If you can, commit to your Hajj and keep to your Shahada, your fundamental understanding in the religion, which is submitting to God alone. That understand that no idol, no element, no thing can harm you or benefit you other than within God's will. Only God can do this. So to give you, God willing, in the second sermon, we'll actually focus on pragmatic resolutions to address the ego. And for everyone, it's going to be difficult. But the verse is obviously in 254. Moses is telling his people, "Faktulu anfusakum," kill your egos, right? And if you look at the translation, anfusakum is yourselves. But obviously, understanding the entire Quran makes you realize that God does not advocate for vice. It's the self who's advocating for vice. If you're committing to a sin, if you're committing a wrongful deed, if you're trapped by your sins, and you are trapped by your sins, you have done that. God didn't cause you to do that. God showed you both paths. You have elected one of the two paths at any one time. And the other insight that I would glean from this verse particularly is if your issue is desire as well, right? Something that you can't abandon, something you can't get rid of, some addiction that you have, this is also a sign of ego, because you're glorifying what you want, what you need, beyond what God is specifying for you. And so if you have absolute trust, taqwa, and reliance on God, you understand that when you make that mistake, you can redeem yourself by asking for forgiveness. But it's important that you realize, actually, this is a form of ego. The surrender to your desire is the same way of surrendering to your ego. When your ego decides, I must win this argument. When your ego decides, I cannot possibly be wrong. When your ego decides, I know better, whatever the case is. This is the same thing. Whether it's the jinn or the self, whatever it is, it's the same thing in your mind. And if you notice, a lot of the times when you have a near miss in your life, or even a pinch, think back to that instantaneous thought in your mind. It's the ego. He said something. You said something. It wasn't a near miss. I was driving and I was kind of like almost veered to the wrong lane. Everything was fine. I was safe. But in that moment, I was thinking, oh, what if I recite this in the Arabic? Like, look how good I'll look, right? To show that I understand this verse better than another person. In that moment, I was unconscious of the ego taking over. He's like this relentless demon that just wants to take the handle. It's like, mine now, mine now. And your job is to be cognizant of him, first and foremost. Herbie is there always. The slowest, most fundamental failure in your journey to submission is this guy. And he is speaking to you always. He's trying to say to you, oh, this is your point. This is your time to shine. Whatever way that you can inject yourself into the scene, that's Herbie. That's the ego. I feel bad for Herbie because Herbie was actually a good guy in the book. But the ego is not a good guy. That's you. So you need to constantly be thinking about, why did I think that? Right? And then you do what's called the 5 whys. You ask the same question to the same problem 5 times. Why did I think about that? Oh, okay, because it feels good to showcase to someone how intelligent I am, for example. But why is that so good? Oh, it's because maybe in the past I was neglected and I wasn't able to give my turn of speech. And so I feel a bit left out. All right, why did you feel left out? Well, I feel left out because I lack some attention or something along those lines. There's always a deep-seated issue to the ego flaring up. And so as you see the ego, you need to dig deep. They call this the 5 whys, or like root cause analysis. You ask the same question until you find, oh, actually, I have an abandonment issue. For example, every one of us will have some form of issue. Or I need constant praise because I was neglected in some way in my past. As you find that nugget, that's my problem. Oh, don't blame it on the fact that it's happened, whether it's your parents or some situation in the past that has led you to this position where you're the husk of the person you want to be. You focus on what that issue is, right? So if you get angry and you're flaring up with anger, or you're objecting, and by definition, the moment you object, you're not submitting. Then tell yourself you're not a submitter, like we've heard before in Rashad's audio. But also in that moment, find out why. Why is it that you're so angry over this one thing that you can't control? You have no control over everything around you, not even yourself. God is in control of everything. And as you realize that, as the thing that is annoying you, the thing that is hurting you, the thing that is causing you to be enraged, realize that God is allowing that to happen. So your resistance, your fight, is that a direct contradiction to God's message to you. In that moment, you need to realize, okay, I misunderstood something. Maybe I lack knowledge. Maybe I lack patience. How do I gain it? Maybe I've been missing my prayer. Maybe I haven't done enough zikr, commemoration of God, which, God willing, we'll get into the ways you can address your ego, God willing. Tubul Allah, repent. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Praise be to God, Lord of the universe. I bear witness that I bear witness that He is the one God and He has no partners. Wahdahu la sharika lah. So we talked about subordination. That was the third element of this 5 things that you have to do to resolve a constraint. And the third element is subordination. Subordination is basically giving away the things you don't control to other people. Let's say you're very bad at time management, for example. Let's say you struggle to wake up. Make it so that it's easier for you to wake up, or the cost of you not doing so is greater. For example, what I do, I don't pray the Isha until I wake up to do my Fajr. So if I miss my Fajr, I miss both my Isha and Fajr. So wake up before Fajr to do my Isha, then I wait for, 10, 15 minutes. Also, I'm eating. Then I do my Fajr. So subconsciously, I'm basically threatening myself. I'm saying, look, missing one prayer is bad. I don't want to do that again. But also, I want to train my soul to be able to command my body to the point where I can say 3 o'clock, time to pray, 4 o'clock, time to pray. And the body listens, the body heeds. And so to get there, you have many avenues. But the point is, you subordinate. You tell your partner or some person close to you, look, I'm struggling to do this. I want you to help me, give me a reminder at this specific time that you should pray or that you should do this. Or whenever I flare out in anger, I want you to tell me that I've lost my cool. right? Please just remind me. Just say that word or this specific verse. And so subordination is basically asking for help, right? And asking for help, obviously, primarily is from God. But God has given you the utilities and abilities to expand your reach and your ability to communicate to others. And everyone around us is a potential tool to help you. Every single person, whether it's in this community or a physical person that you have in your environment, engage them. Recognize, and in your mind, always be wary of the fact that the ego is there. Right? That verse, I'll read it again. Consequently, God sends him astray. This is in 45:23 again. Sealing his hearing, his mind, and places a veil on his eyes. And God says, أَفَلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ, will you not take heed? What God is saying here to you is that this action is permanent and irreversible. Irreversible. If you persistently and continuously glorify your ego and follow your desires, your direction, your understanding, your limitations, and you put yourself beyond the truth that is coming into you, God is saying at some point that is going to be a trigger where God seals your mind. You have no hope at that point. If God abandons you, like in 3:160, إِن يَنْصُرْكُمُ اللَّهُ فَلَا غَالِبَ لَكُمْ, who else will come to support you? No one's going to support you. I've had this happen in classroom, actually. If the most popular guy in class said, oh, this guy's weird, I'm gonna leave him behind or whatever, everyone by peer pressure is like, oh, I don't want to talk to this guy. When God says this guy is done, all the angels turn around and say, he's done. Right? Because they understand absolutely in God's authority and perfect judgment. The point is, don't get there. The point is, maximize every ember, every neuron you have in your existence to realize this is in front of you. This problem exists now with every single one of us, right? And this ego is facing you, trying to overtake the system, trying to make you drive in a specific way. And you need to be conscious of him. And instead of making him your God, you make God your God. You subjugate, you surrender, you absolutely release every opportunity, every strength, every knowledge, every foundation that you believe is yours was given to you by God. And part of that is appreciation. The more you appreciate, the more you behave like someone who is humble. Imagine someone who's arrogant and he says, instead of, thank God I'm intelligent, thank God I'm able, thank God I have all this money, thank God I worked from 20 hours a day and I slept for 2 hours or whatever, right? Not picking on you specifically, but thank God I worked hard. No, you didn't work hard. God gave it to you. The energy, the motivation, the direction, the opportunity, the path, every single thing that you had was directed and designed by him. But instead of that, this same person said, praise God for giving me this opportunity. This is God's gift. God's gift. Right? And I take it willingly. So there's a recognition there. There's a change in the perspective. Instead of from me doing this, it's God giving me this. So it doesn't mean you don't say, if you have a gift from God, let's say you're intelligent, you're good looking, you're very talented in any particular facet, this is still a gift from God. You can acknowledge those gifts and you can say that I'm very grateful for God for these gifts. And appreciation is a means at which you shave ego. The ego doesn't want to appreciate. The ego wants to showcase itself as something supreme, as something important, when in truth, it is not important. Only importance that comes is from God. And the fourth one, I said it was the elevation of the constraint. So in 13:11, God does not change the condition of any people unless they themselves make the decision to change. So the elevation typically in a business is when they decide to invest, right? This particular machine is performing poorly. We've done absolutely the best we can. We've got 3 people manning it. This guy is helping it. You've exploited it to the maximum possible outcome, but it's still the bottleneck. It's still slow. At this point, you need to invest. You need to do a little more than what's available. And this is your investment now to your soul, right? Instead of just saying, I'm going to think about my ego, that's insufficient. That's nothing. You can exploit some of those conditions. You have to actually dedicate time, right? And the ego flares up, typically for me, when I've seen it, is through engagement, through differences, through friction, which causes adhesion. If you have a particularly different view, for example, your understanding is different to mine, and I engage you, what's going to happen? One of our egos is going to flare up, because one of us, it's possible that both of us lack the understanding, but it's, God willing, one of us has a better understanding. At that point in time, the person who has the better understanding will have the confidence and the ability to calm his tempers and nerves, right? Because his response is based on knowledge, not based on the lack thereof. And so the ego never needs to kick in, because it's like, I know this to be true, whether you accept it or not. Doesn't change my position, doesn't change my salvation, doesn't change my journey. And so when you have this kind of debate or engagement, and it's vital that you do, an ego is going to flare up. This is invariable. One person going to be like, yo, but I don't think this is right because A, B, C, D. And the other person goes, and it's a back and forth. At some point, maybe even not in that instance, you take away and you realize, okay, yeah, I was wrong there. And I just have to admit. So these are some of the things you can do to cleanse yourself. And God is saying here in 13:11, the choice precedes the action. The choice precedes the evidence. For me, when I entered submission, before I decided to submit to God, it was a perpetual journey of trying to find the proof of Code 19. I was counting the verses, the chapters, the grammatical value and all these things. And I just couldn't make all the puzzles pieces fit. But at some point I realized, actually, logically speaking, could it be that Sunni Islam or traditional Islam is correct? No, zero chance. At a minimum, the hadith is absolutely corrupt and should go in the bin. Could it also be that just focusing on the Quran alone is the path to the truth? The answer is also no, because my version of the truth is going to be different to your version of the truth, to your version of the truth, to your version of the truth. And we would fight ad infinitum to all the possibilities, all the permutations of the understanding of the Quran. And what's going to differ between when you want to understand the Quran to fit your desire. I've met people who are native Arabic speakers who say that the Quran doesn't prohibit alcohol, right? In fact, he says that it's recommended in certain instances, and he uses the verse where God says, God does do not enter the prayer in an intoxicated state. And it's true, but that's not an allowance for alcohol, right? That's not an allowance or a free ticket for you to do so. And so just because your proficiency or your understanding in a specific language or a specific domain is extreme doesn't mean you have all the other understandings you need. You haven't just got to be proficient in Arabic. You've got to understand the sciences, the physics of it all. You have to understand the context of what is being presented. You have to understand the reason we are all here on earth, right? So everything has to fit in this jigsaw puzzle. And the easiest solution is to have someone with authority to just say, look, I've just been given the answer by God. I don't know more than you do. I just know that this is what God commanded me to tell you. Right? In 4066, Muhammad was saying, Wa umirtu an uslima li rabbil alameen. I was commanded to submit to the Lord of the universe. And he received that command the same way that we've received this command. So back to that 13:11. Understand that this change does not happen unless you choose for it to happen. You have to decide internally. And for me, when I accepted submission, I surrendered. I said to God, God, this is beyond my scope, my ability at this point in time. I don't have the answers, but this is the logical answer. I believe it to be true. I submit to you. If you give me the understanding in the future, I'll be appreciative. If not, then I accept your judgment. Or if you showcase to me that this is wrong, that's also a possibility, right? Then I will move to that position or renege from the understanding. And it turned out the very next day, I found the Git book or the calculation where each of the letters are highlighted, right? And I understood that there was more complexity in the way that it was to be calculated. The answer was literally given to me on my lap, but I had to submit first. And that's the important element. You have to choose to submit. Then, if God wills, he may reveal the answer to you. So the final step out of those 5 points, first was identify ego. We know him or her. 2 is exploit. Exploit means just within your current means, make the ego expire, lower his ability to interject and interfere in your life. 3 was not elevation. 3 was subordination. Subordination means you then ask people to help you with your problem. For us, it would be the ego. 4 is elevation. This is when you get serious and you can, I don't know, dedicate time to focus on meditation, for example, or just maybe even study books that talk about how the ego flares up, how you end up overtaking a conversation, like we talked about before, the Pareto analysis. 80% of the problem comes from 20% of the causes. 80% of the speeches that happen in an environment shouldn't be you. Right? If you're taking 80% of the airwaves, then possibly you're one of the problems. Your ego is, for whatever reason, wanting to showcase itself. And finally, it's basically continuous improvement. If ever you're successful in demonetizing the ego, making him small and less of an interference in your life, a new bottleneck will appear. Right? Imagine a bottle with several different necks. If you expand one of those necks, there's still another bottleneck somewhere there. And this is a perpetual exercise for us. And so in 1599, and worship your Lord in order to attain certainty. So this worship, this dedication, this absolute surrender to God, where you dedicate your lives, your money, every mindset, every morsel of your existence is catered towards understanding God's authority, God's supremacy. Then you have the chance to remove the ego and a new problem will come, right? We talked about it from the previous sermon. God wishes to fix you one defect at a time. This defect, he's now a calm-tempered person. I don't know if that's possible for me. God willing it is, or at least calmer, more tempered person. Now let's address this particular problem, whatever it is. And so this is a perpetual exercise. You find the problem, you address the problem, you find the next problem. Don't be too hasty to fix yourselves. And another sign of ego, as I remember this, is speed and haste. If you're very imminently eager to produce or receive or be successful, this is a sign that the ego is driving in that moment. Some of the things you can do is slow yourselves down by saying, for example, I've been producing content video and stuff like that. So sometimes I feel the pressure of I haven't done anything this week. I should, right? But that's the ego talking. The ego is trying to say, oh, people need this from you. Nobody cares. Nobody watches. Nobody needs anything from you. God is in control of every event. Every singularity in the universe is being managed. You just have to focus on yourself. So that's a way for you to actually reduce stress as well. You can say to yourself, actually, it's fine. I'm just going to slow down. I'm going to take things easier. What I would normally put myself on to do every week, I'm going to do every 2 weeks. So I might even give myself a month grace. Doesn't matter. But the point is you slow yourself down. So that pace is a sign that you're willing to surrender. You're willing to let the ego pass. Doesn't mean you stop. Doesn't mean you stop striving. So finally, just focusing back on 254, I'll read the whole verse here. You have wronged your souls by worshipping the calf. You must repent to your Creator. You shall kill your egos. This is better for you in the sight of your Creator. So there's a lot to capture here, but the main point is you have to treat your spiritual journey, your ability to reach and submit to God, like it is some kind of business, right? It's a transaction. I'm not debating you because I hate you or I think I'm better. I'm doing this just so that I can get past this thing, whatever this thing is, right? And at least my journey in submission, it was tough in the beginning because I had to lower my ego many times. In fact, it felt like a killing because at the end of it, I just felt like something died. And that's a good thing. If the ego dies, if you are hurt internally, that's a momentary pain for an eternity of salvation. It's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Akim Sola.